She's not really family. My brother said it the way you'd comment on the weather, casual, unbothered, like the words didn't have weight. She just lives here and takes up space. My parents didn't argue. My mother refilled her wine glass. My father nodded slowly, the way he always did when my brother said something he'd been thinking but hadn't said out loud yet. And I sat there at the end of the table, the one I'd helped pay for, in the house I'd co-signed the lease on, eating food I'd bought because my brother had overdrafted again, and I thought, okay, let's find out exactly how much space I take up. My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 31 years old. I'm the second of 3 children, the only daughter, and for the last 9 years I've been the financial spine of a family that never once looked down to notice. It didn't start with intention. It started with love, or what I thought was love. When my father lost his job the year I turned 22, I was the only one working. My older brother was in between things, which was his permanent condition, and my younger brother was still in school. So I helped. That's what you do. You help. A few hundred here for rent. A few hundred there for groceries. A small loan to keep the lights on. My father called it temporary. My mother called it family. My older brother called it nothing at all because he never acknowledged it once. Temporary stretched into a year, then 2. Then I got a better job and the requests got bigger to match. They needed help with the car. They needed help with my older brother's legal fees after a dispute with a former landlord. They needed help with my younger brother's tuition because the financial aid hadn't come through and the deadline was tomorrow. There was always a deadline. There was always a reason. And I was always the answer. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked if I could afford it. The assumption was simply that I could, and therefore I would, and the conversation would end there. For years I told myself it was fine. I was good at my job. I made decent money. I didn't have kids, didn't have a partner at the time, didn't have the kind of visible expenses they could point to and say, well, she has bills too. My life was quiet and self-contained, and I had arranged it that way. Slowly, without realizing I was arranging it around their needs instead of my own. I postponed moving into my own apartment twice because the timing was bad for them. I didn't take the job offer in Denver because my mother cried and said who would help if something happened. I broke up with someone I genuinely loved, partly because the financial strain had made me someone I didn't recognize, short-tempered and hollow and always calculating. The family had a word for people like me, dépendable. They said it like a compliment. I heard it like a job description. My older brother's name is Derek. He is 35 years old and has never held a job for longer than 8 months. He is charming in the way that people who've never been told no tend to be loud, confident, funny when he wants something, and completely invisible when the bill arrives. My parents adored him. He had my father's jaw and my mother's laugh, and some untraceable quality that made people want to give him things. My younger brother, Caleb, was different. He was 26, working his way through a graduate program, genuinely trying. I didn't resent helping him. What I resented was that nobody noticed the difference between the two, between helping someone build a future and enabling someone to avoid one. The dinner where everything changed happened on a Tuesday in March. My mother had made pot roast, which was a production she only undertook when she wanted the evening to feel significant. Derek was in town, which meant the energy in the house had a particular charge to it, the way it always did when he was around. My father sat at the head of the table and carved the meat with the focused solemnity of someone performing a ritual. I'd driven 40 minutes to be there. I had an early meeting the next morning. I had 3 pending invoices I needed to review before bed. I came because my mother had texted and said it would mean a lot, and I had not yet learned how to let that sentence land without immediately rearranging my evening. It started quietly. Derek was talking about a new business venture, something involving real estate, something that required startup capital and had enormous potential and just needed a few people who believed in it to get off the ground. I'd heard variations of this pitch 5 times in 6 years. My father was nodding. My mother was smiling. Then Derek looked at me across the table, and something shifted in his face. Not malice exactly, more like boredom, like I was an object in the room he'd stopped finding interesting. She's not really family, he said. Not to me. To the table, to the air, to no one in particular. She just lives here and takes up space. My father made a sound that was almost a laugh. Derek, I'm serious, Derek said, leaning back, expansive. When's the last time she actually did anything for this family? Like as a person, not as a checkbook. I set my fork down. Not dramatically. Carefully. She's right there, Caleb said quietly from the other end of the table. I know she is, Derek said. And he looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes was something I had no word for until later. It was the look of someone who has never once worried you might leave. My mother cleared her throat. He doesn't mean it like that. How does he mean it? I asked. My voice was level. That surprised me. You know how Derek is, my father said. I did know. That was the problem. I finished my water. I folded my napkin. I said I had an early morning, and I thanked my mother for dinner, and I left before dessert. In the car, I didn't cry. I drove in silence and felt the particular quiet that comes not from peace, but from something finally settling into place. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a calendar reminder I'd set 8 months earlier, back when I'd first started quietly building the architecture of what came next. I looked at the notification, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I smiled on the drive home. I want to be clear about something. What I did next wasn't impulsive. It wasn't revenge in the hot, reactive sense of the word. I had been watching the pattern for years, cataloging it the way you catalog a slow leak, noting where the water came in, tracing it back to the source, understanding the structure before you ever touch the wall. 8 months earlier, I had sat down with a notebook and written out everything. Not emotionally, practically. Every account I had co-signed, every automatic transfer I had set up and never canceled, every financial tether that connected my stability to their dysfunction. It was a long list, longer than I expected, which told me something about how long I had been looking away. I had spent those 8 months quietly, methodically, untangling. I opened new accounts in only my name at a bank my family didn't use. I moved my direct deposit. I contacted a financial advisor, a woman named Sandra, who had the particular gift of delivering bad news without apology, and we restructured everything. I talked to an attorney about the co-signed lease, about the loan I had guaranteed for Derek's previous apartment, about the best way to exit obligations that had accumulated around me like barnacles without anyone having the audacity to ask permission. The calendar reminder was the last step. The one I'd scheduled for the night everything felt ready. I'd written the note to myself in plain language. You can stop now. The first calls came the next morning. Derek called at 8:14 a.m. I was already at work, coffee in hand, reviewing the invoices I hadn't gotten to the night before. I watched his name light up my screen and let it go to voicemail. He called again at 8:32. At 9:05 he texted, "Nora, something's wrong with the card." I didn't respond. My father called at 10:20. He didn't leave a message, which meant he was either very calm or very angry. With my father, silence was never neutral. My mother texted at 11:47. "Call us when you get a chance, honey. Nothing urgent." The word honey was doing a lot of work in that sentence. I went to lunch. I ordered a sandwich. I sat outside in the pale March sun and felt something I didn't immediately recognize. It took me most of the meal to identify it. It was the feeling of not bracing for impact. The escalation came that evening. I was home, unpacking groceries I had bought for myself, only myself, for the first time in memory, without mentally factoring in whether anyone else needed something when my doorbell rang. I knew before I opened it. Derek stood in the hallway with the specific expression of a man who has run out of other options. Behind him, my mother, her coat half-buttoned like she'd left in a hurry. My father was not with them, which meant this was the softer approach. They had assessed me and deployed accordingly. "What's going on?" Derek said. Not angry yet, controlled, testing the temperature. "Come in," I said. They came in. I did not offer anything to drink. I sat in the chair across from the couch and I let them arrange themselves and I waited. "The transfer didn't go through," my mother said. Her voice was careful. "The automatic payment for Derek's storage unit. And the joint account, there's nothing in it." "I know," I said. "You know?" Derek's control slipped slightly. I closed those accounts. I removed myself from the transfers. I had my attorney send the formal notice to the relevant parties about the co-signed lease. "You should have received something in the mail by now." The silence in my apartment had a specific texture. "You can't do that," Derek said. "I already did. Those are obligations, Nora. You can't just..." "Derek." My voice was quiet. Not angry. Quiet the way a room gets quiet when the noise stops. When did you ask me if I could afford any of it? He blinked. When did you ask me if I wanted to? When did you ask me anything at all? I looked at my mother. When did either of you? My mother's chin lifted the way it did when she was preparing to reframe something. We're a family. Families help each other. Help goes both ways, I said. I've been the only direction it traveled in this family for 9 years. That's not fair, she said. I have records, I said. Dates, amounts, purposes. 9 years of records. Would you like to go through them? Nobody answered. Derek leaned forward, and for a moment, I thought he was going to be honest. I thought something real was going to happen in that room. His jaw worked. Then he said, "You're doing this because of what I said at dinner." No, I said. I'm doing this because of what you said at dinner. And the dinner before that, and every dinner for 9 years where I sat at a table I helped pay for and was treated like furniture. Last night was just the night I stopped pretending it was fine. My mother's eyes filled. She was good at this. Not manipulative exactly, I don't think she calculated it. I think she had simply learned, over a lifetime, that tears were a language that got things done. I felt the familiar pull of guilt, the reflex that had been trained into me so deeply I didn't always recognize it as conditioned, rather than genuine. I let the pull pass through me without grabbing onto it. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I don't want an apology. I don't want a scene. I want you to understand that what you took for granted is gone now, and you're going to have to figure out how to stand up without using me as the floor. Derek stood. He had the particular rigidity of someone whose dignity is the only currency he has left. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe, I said, but not tonight. They left. I locked the door. I stood in the hallway of my apartment for a long moment, and what I felt was not triumph. It was more like the physical sensation after setting down something heavy you'd been carrying. So long you'd stopped noticing the weight. A kind of bewildered lightness. I called Sandra in the morning to confirm everything had processed. Then I went to work and didn't think about my family for almost 6 hours, which was the longest stretch I could remember. What I hadn't anticipated was my aunt. My father's sister had always occupied the neutral middle ground in our family, present at major events, not close enough to be involved in the ongoing operations of dysfunction. She called me on a Thursday, 2 weeks after that night in my apartment, and I picked up because I thought it was unrelated. "Your father is very hurt," she said, after the pleasantries. "I imagine so," I said. "He says you've abandoned the family." "I've stopped paying for it," I said. "That's different." There was a pause. "Nora, he's your father. He watched his son call me furniture at dinner and said, that's just how Derek is, for 20 years. He watched it, and he said nothing, and he expected me to keep writing checks." I stopped. I love my father. But love isn't the same as unconditional access to my bank account. My aunt was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You're right. I know you're right." Her voice was careful and tired. "I just don't know what he's going to do." "He's going to figure it out," I said. "He managed before I was old enough to have a job. He can manage again." That conversation, oddly, was the one that settled something in me. Because my aunt wasn't wrong that my father was hurt. And I sat with that, really sat with it, didn't dismiss it, and I understood that the hurt was real. It just wasn't caused by what he thought it was caused by. He wasn't hurt because I'd stopped loving him. He was hurt because the architecture had changed, and he didn't know how to live in the new version of it. That was his work to do, not mine. The month that followed was quieter than I expected, and harder in ways I also hadn't expected. The financial piece was clean. Sandra had done thorough work. My credit score, which had taken quiet hits from co-signed accounts I hadn't monitored closely enough, started recovering. My savings account, which had been doing a very convincing impression of a sieve for the better part of a decade, began to accumulate in a way that felt foreign and slightly unreal. I kept checking the balance like I expected it to disappear. The harder part was the grief I hadn't given myself permission to feel while I was busy being useful. I missed my family. Not the version of the relationship that had actually existed. I didn't miss that at all, not even a little. I missed the version I had been hoping for. The one where my mother asked how I was and actually waited for the answer. The one where my father was proud of me for something other than my earning potential. The one where Derek looked at me like a sister. I grieved that version in the evenings, in small doses, the way you process something you've finally admitted you're never going to get back. Caleb called once, about 3 weeks in. Not to pressure me, not to deliver a message from anyone. He called to say he'd heard what happened, and he was sorry, and he should have said something a long time ago. You were 26, I said. You were dealing with your own things. Still, he said. We talked for an hour. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years. He asked about my life, my actual life, not my financial situation, and I realized I had forgotten how to talk about myself to my family. I'd been so accustomed to being asked for things that being asked about myself felt like a language I'd half forgotten. I didn't know it was that bad, Caleb said at one point. I didn't let you know, I said. I didn't let anyone know. I thought if I just kept being useful, eventually, it would feel like enough. Did it? No, I said. It just made me easier to take for granted. The real confrontation happened 6 weeks after the dinner. My father asked to meet me for coffee, and I said yes because I thought I was ready and I wanted to be done with the unfinished version of it. He was already there when I arrived. He looked older in a way that 6 weeks shouldn't have produced, which told me the change had probably been accumulating for a while, and I hadn't let myself see it. He was wearing the jacket I'd helped him buy for my cousin's wedding 4 years ago. I noticed that and put it away. He waited until we both had coffee. Then he said, "You could have warned us." I tried, I said. Every time I said I was stretched thin and you told me it was temporary. Every time I asked Derek to contribute and you said he was going through something. Every time I said I needed to slow down and Mom cried and I backed off. I folded my hands around my cup. I warned you for 9 years. I just didn't warn you loudly. He looked at his coffee. I didn't realize how much you were doing. I know, I said. That's part of the problem. Derek he stopped. Started again. Derek is having a hard time. Derek has been having a hard time since he was 22, I said. At some point, the hard time is just his life. I watched my father's face. I love Derek. But I am not responsible for the consequences of his choices. I was never responsible for that. You made me feel like I was, and I let you, and now I'm not anymore. My father was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, a woman was trying to fold a stroller one-handed while her toddler stood in the middle of the sidewalk eating a pretzel. Life at its most ordinary and relentless. We expected too much, my father said finally. It was not quite an apology. But it was more honest than I had been expecting. Yes, I said. I don't know how to fix it. You don't have to fix it, I said. You just have to stop expecting me to. I paid for my coffee and left him there. Not cruelly, I hugged him on the way out, and the hug was real, and when I walked to my car, my eyes were hot in a way I hadn't prepared for. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes and let myself feel it. Then I drove home. What nobody tells you about rebuilding your own life from the materials everyone else has been using is how strange the abundance feels at first. Not the financial abundance, though that was real and growing. The time, the mental space. The particular silence that existed in my apartment on a Friday night when nobody needed anything from me. I started running again. I'd stopped about 4 years ago, because between work and family logistics, I couldn't find a reliable hour in the week that I could call completely mine without someone filling it. Now I ran every morning and it was not efficient and not practical and served no one's interest but my own, and I loved it with a ferocity that surprised me. I signed up for a ceramics class that met on Tuesday evenings. I was not good at ceramics. The instructor was patient. The other students were a retired firefighter named Glenn, 2 women in their 40s who came together and finished each other's sentences, and a 19-year-old who wore headphones the entire class and made perfect bowls every single time. I made things that looked like they had survived something. I kept them all. I started calling an old friend I'd let the relationship thin out with over the years of management and maintenance. Her name was Priya. When I called, she didn't make me explain the gap. She just started talking like we'd spoken last week, and I thought I do not deserve this person, and I am going to try to deserve her better. Derek called twice in those weeks. The first time he was still operating from the position of someone who believed this was a negotiation. He wanted to discuss terms. He wanted to know what it would take to resolve the situation, which was how he framed it, the situation, as though he had not been the one who constructed it over a decade of choices. There's nothing to resolve, Derek, I said. I'm not punishing you. I've just stopped making your life my responsibility. You can't just opt out of a family, he said. I didn't opt out, I said. I renegotiated the terms. My terms now include not being called furniture at the dinner table and not covering your debts. Those are the terms. You can choose whether to be in a relationship with me under those terms. That's the only decision you have to make. The second call came 3 weeks later. He was quieter. Something had shifted in the interval. Some corner had been turned that I wasn't there to witness. He didn't ask for anything. He told me he'd started working again, a job that was below what he considered his level, but that paid regularly, and was, as he put it, something. I told him I was glad. I meant it. I didn't realize, he said. He said it the way people say things they're not sure they should be saying. How much you were doing. I thought a pause. I think I thought you were fine with it. I wasn't. I know that now. It wasn't an apology in the classic structure of the word, but it was the closest Derek had come in my memory to accounting for himself, and I chose to receive it. My mother was the last and the most complicated. She didn't call for almost 2 months. When she did, she called on a Sunday afternoon, and her voice had the careful quality of someone who had practiced what she wanted to say. She said she had been thinking about things. She said she knew she had relied on me too much and for too long. She said she had looked back over the last 9 years, and she understood now why I had done what I had done. She didn't say sorry, that word seemed to be stuck somewhere on the way out, but she said she was glad I was doing well, and she hoped I knew the door was open. I told her I knew. I told her I was glad the door was open. I told her I would walk through it on my own terms, when I was ready, and that I hoped she could understand that readiness might take some time. I do understand, she said. Good, I said. We talked for 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with money or obligation. She told me about a garden she was trying to start in the backyard. I told her about the ceramics class. She laughed when I described my lopsided bowls. A real laugh, not the social kind. And for a moment, she sounded like someone I wanted to know. We hung up, and I sat with the strangeness of it, the not quite resolution, the open question of what the relationship would become. The understanding that the version of my family that existed now was a different shape than the one I had grown up inside, and the one I had maintained through sheer financial will. Different shape. Unknown contents. Possibly better. Possibly just different. I didn't know yet. That was the honest answer. What I knew was this. On a Thursday evening in April, I came home from work to my apartment. My apartment, my name on the lease, my name only, nobody else's. And I opened a savings statement, and the number there was the largest number that had ever belonged to me. Not extraordinary, not retirement by 40 numbers, just the particular number that meant I had been building my own life for the first time, instead of subsidizing someone else's. I poured a glass of wine and I sat on the floor in front of my coffee table because the couch was occupied by a throw blanket, and I didn't feel like moving it, and I thought about what Derek had said at that dinner. She just lives here and takes up space. I had been so afraid, for so long, that he was right. That without the usefulness, I would be nothing. That I would become the dependent one. That the family's casual contempt would be proven justified. The fear had driven me to help more, contribute more, make myself more indispensable, which had made me easier to take for granted, which had made me help more. It was its own closed system, self-sustaining and self-defeating. And here I was on a Thursday evening, taking up space in my own apartment, in my own life, and the space was mine, and nobody was asking me to justify it, and the absence of that asking was so profound, it still occasionally felt like something missing before I remembered it was freedom. I wasn't useless. I had never been useless. I was, in the precise and literal sense, invaluable, which is to say, they had treated me as though I had no value beyond what I could be spent on, and they were wrong, and now the invoice for that error belonged entirely to them. I was not the furniture in that house. I was the structure underneath it, hidden and load-bearing and taken for granted until the day it wasn't there anymore. I took up space, my own space, and for the first time in 9 years, I did it without anyone's permission.